Okay, so a long time ago, my mother used to read to a tape recorder laying on her bed while my brother and I were at school. And she would do this to produce a tape. Sorry, I should have done this beforehand. She would do this to produce a tape of her reading a story that we were reading together as a family. She'd read a chapter or two, and she would give it to my dad on tape so that he could put it in the car radio while we were driving to judo, because it was probably a 30-minute drive and two bored children in the car are terrible. And then she did it for years. She also read to us in person on the couch at bedtime and all of that. But when we were older and we were spending so much time going to and from judo, she made recordings of herself reading to us, a book on tape style thing. I'm reading a book, I've read it before, that I am enjoying very, very much, and I want to share it with my kids, but I don't know. This is for David and Megan, and you're too old and too busy and all the things that you're supposed to be right now to be able to sit next to me cuddled up on the couch while I read out loud. And I don't, but I have this time right now, and I'm going to try and read this book to you and figure out a way to get you these videos. So this is, I should tell you what this is. This is Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. Uncle Joe gave me this book, I think, as a birthday present, maybe, or Christmas present. At the very least, he recommended it. I can't remember if it was a gift or a recommendation, but it is a gift to me because it's a fabulous book. Love it. Table of contents. I'm going to go to chapter 1. That's where we're going to start, is chapter 1. We're skipping whatever happened before chapter 1. He woke up with no eyebrows and no idea of how he'd gotten into such a position. It wasn't just that he couldn't remember why he was laying on his back or why there were tiny fires smoldering throughout the room. He couldn't remember the room. It was not the kind of room to be forgettable. The floor was made of black marble with concentric silver circles embedded in it. The remains of an elaborate pattern of magical runes and indeterminate squiggles chalked around the outermost circle had been scuffed into partial illegibility. A dagger, whose death's head pommel gave him the willies, lay coated in caking blood. The wall had manacles embedded in the stone, which made him passingly grateful to have only been on his back on the floor. He didn't know whether the large articulated bird skeleton was intended as an often used resource or just decoration. The human skull with half-melted candle. Oh my gosh. Half the audience is gone. Skull, half-melted candle jutting out of it, attempted to be both. As far as he was concerned, it succeeded at neither. Who had chosen this decorating scheme? He was tempted to give the owner a piece of his mind, if only he could remember who the owner was, or who he was. The realization did not so much hit him as politely tap him on the shoulder, having waited patiently for him to stop being distracted by the mess. He lost his breath at the thought. How could you forget who you were? If you had forgotten, how could you fail to notice that simple fact? But then, how often did you think about it? He couldn't remember when the last time he'd informed himself of his own name was. But then, he couldn't remember much of anything. He would have to ask the next person he saw. Someone knocked on the door. He immediately abandoned any resolution of asking anyone anything. He was the only person left in the ruined workshop of someone who kept human skulls as decor, and things were on fire. He did not want the sinister owner of this room to come back and blame it all on him. If he stayed very still, maybe they would go away. Very slowly and with great deliberation, the bird skeleton collapsed. He had enough time to see it start to fall and feel his stomach plummet with it. He had nowhere near enough time to catch it, although he tried. The main mass, its mount weakened by whatever had removed his eyebrows and his memory, slammed into the floor before his outstretched hands. The resulting crash scraped his nerves and echoed through the workshop. Some of the bones bounced free, and these toppled down the bookshelf with musical little plinks. He scrambled after them as if somehow he could just make the sound stop happening. Whoever was outside would overlook the first big crash. Bones skittered away from his shaking fingers, and a cascading arpeggio. His elbow knocked into the bird skull, which rolled audibly across the floor, grinning all the while. He slammed a foot down on the skull, shutting its gaped beak, and unbalancing a teetering pile of books. He shoved the books back before they could fall, which knocked the stone pestle behind it over. He sat down heavily, defeated. The bowl, only a little chipped, took its sweet time, rolling in a spiral, the sound of stone wobbling finally to a halt. There was a long silence. Someone knocked again. "My lord?" The voice was scratchy, accented as if the words didn't quite fit in the owner's mouth. "Need firefighting team?" Oh, he probably should try to put out all those little fires before something bigger caught. But letting in the team would reveal that their lord was not here, and then they would want to know where he was. They would want to know who he was. And then a great number of very uncomfortable questions he did not have answers to would result. What would this lord of theirs sound like? Evil, clearly. He tried to make his voice sound deeper. Keep it short. "Everything's fine." He looked around frantically. Not much in the way of firefighting equipment in the room. A black table hosted glassware, or at least used to. He hoped that wasn't a problem that half the potion flasks... He hoped it wasn't a problem that half the potion flasks had shattered, and that a blue liquid was oozing out of a cracked alembic. The way the work table sizzled suggested that it might be. But none of the remaining bottles seemed likely to contain water. Fortunately, most of the fires were on the tiny side. "Need help, my lord?" Very persistent. Very commendable. Possibly suicidal. The owner of the voice clearly put duty ahead of self-preservation. Oh, it stopped. No, it didn't. Oh, it's still going. Okay. I'm going to get to a break and stop at some point. The owner of the voice clearly put duty ahead of self-preservation. He grabbed a thick sheaf of papers and set to beating the little flames to death. No! He knocked over a broken bottle, which crashed to the floor in a spectacular spray of glass shards. A whiff of purple smoke escaped from the contents rapidly dried into a powdery residue. "My lord?" The handle of the door jiggled. His voice rose to a crack. "Stay out!" There was no way that they would fail to notice that this wasn't their master, but it was too late to come up with a better plan. "You'll, disrupt the spell." The jiggling immediately stopped. "Sorry, my lord." The voice had its own note of panic now. "Leave me alone!" There, another fire out. The hem of his robe had been eaten away to a lacy texture by that splash. "Yes, my lord." He would have savored the sound of the retreating footsteps, but he was too busy putting out the owl wing that had caught alight. Not until he'd extinguished the last of the fires did it occur to him that the sheaf of papers might have been valuable in and of itself. Perhaps reducing the bottom several pages to a charred ruin had been unwise. He collapsed in the massive wooden chair in the corner to catch his breath. It was a monster of a thing, a dark wood nightmare that had to weigh a ton. Sultry carved women peered through their hair that barely hid their nakedness. One licked an apple in her hand with a long forked tongue. He stared at it, fascinated and vaguely disgusted, and all too distracted from the real issues that he needed to be considering. So this was shock. It seemed terribly inconvenient that the brain's reaction to being placed in mortal jeopardy was to become much stupider. Focus. Who was he? He was dressed in black velvet, which fell all the way to the floor except for the new holes. Expensive. Soft shoes, nothing meant for tromping around outside. A belt made of small silver panels linked together, which felt rather like it had been made several years' worth of beer and cakes earlier. The sleeves were a lost cause, shredded and singed, the remnants trailing impractically. It gave him a rather sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. An enormous mirror, as wide as his outstretched arms and half his height, loomed from an ornate stand bolted to the floor a couple of inches away from the wall. A sheer piece of black fabric hung over the top, completely covering the glass so that he could see dim outlines. He forced himself to his feet. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the cloth free. No shock of recognition. The middle-aged face that looked back at him was not remotely familiar. Pale white skin, dark hair, rather sinister goatee. Although the look was ruined a bit by the jowl that started to appear around his chin, and the soot, and the lack of eyebrows. The falling sensation in his stomach finally hit the bottom. This menacing room, with its mixture of weird and ridiculous, it was his. The voice outside the door obeyed his commands because they were familiar. There was only one kind of person who would have such a room and who would dress in such a way. He was a dark wizard. He half expected some kind of acknowledgement of the realization, a roll of thunder, a croak of a crow, but there was nothing. He stared at his reflection, feeling increasingly ridiculous. He turned up his palms and willed them to crackle with electricity or fill with fire or something. Nothing. The mirror itself, though, filled him with a sense of unease that did not dissipate until he draped the fabric back over it. The fabric had two sides, he noticed. One side was translucent, allowing shapes to be discerned. The reverse, on the other hand, was somehow completely opaque. He wasn't sure how he knew, but something told him to make sure the opaque side faced the mirror. So, a wizard. It gave him something more to work with, but the lack of a name itched him. The desk was awash in singed paper and cut crystals, stoppered bottles, and small wooden chests, all sprinkled with shards of broken glass. He'd have to sift through it. Surely there would be some kind of clue. He grabbed a handful of papers. He had a moment of fear that he would have forgotten how to read. How did he know he knew how to read? But the words looked perfectly familiar. They were spell notes and diagrams and explanations, and as he read them, the meaning flooded back. He paused for a moment, staring at his hand. It wasn't enough to just will the flame. He needed to picture the diagram and the anchor on another object, and he gave that little twist in his mind, and a dried rose, part of an incongruous bouquet shoved in a dusty bottle in the corner, crumbled into ash as a little ball of fire appeared in the middle of his cupped palm. He stared at it until it burned its way through the fuel he'd given it, and then it winked out. He crumpled his face into his hands and nearly wept. He still remembered something. He wasn't totally powerless. He had magic. Some, at least. The simple things. The complex workings, though, eluded him. He could feel the shadowy architecture in his mind, as if he'd stepped into a darkened cathedral with only a single candle for light. The soaring buttresses were more felt than seen. They were still there, just waiting for enough light to be revealed. And what else was there? He started opening little boxes at random. I'm going to check and see how much longer this chapter is, or if there's a decent break anytime soon, because I think it's almost dinner time. All right. Not seeing a decent break and wanting to stop so that I can eat dinner, I'm going to put a bookmark there, and we'll pick up another time. I love you both. Bye.